José Youngs here with Sports Illustrated MMA and FanSided MMA, standing next to a familiar face in Mike Dyce. He is rejoining us backstage at UFC 225 for tonight only, or maybe in the future for another one of these. Big night of fights in Chicago, and before we get into the fights specifically, what did you think of the crowd here in the United Center?
Yeah, it's been an interesting journey with the fight fans and the crowds in Chicago. The last two events were fight night cards in July, right after International Fight Week, and I think they're kind of in that hangover period, with the blitz of fights. And I think the crowds were kind of lackluster at times. Dillish Alvarado too was on the main event of one of those, Holm, Shevchenko. But I think the crowd tonight was really into it, and I think they did a great job stacking the card with local talent. You had guys like Curtis Blaydes, Andre Arlovsky, who's a old Chicago person. At the beginning of the card, you had Mike Santiago, of course, to CM Punk. But even then, tapping into some of the Rufus Sport fighters that are kind of just up the street in Milwaukee, you had Sergio Pettis. So I think they did a good job of bringing in local talent that people are kind of tied to.
And you brought up a lot of prelim fighters, and we'll get to the main card later. Out of all the prelim fights, which performance stood out to you the most?
Sergio Pettis. I mean, how could that not stand out? Beating Joseph Benavidez, a guy who's only ever lost to Demetrius Johnson and Dominic Cruz, two dominant champions in their respective weight classes. I think that's a huge win to kind of notch that on. And his last fight before that was a loss to Henry Cejudo, who was fighting for Demetrius Johnson in August for the title. So I think he could be next in line.
And I'll present two. I was really impressed with Curtis Blaydes. He knocked out Alistair Overeem. That's his second straight victory over a former K1 champion. Only 27 years old, which is a baby in the heavyweight division, considering Stipe is considered young at, 34, 33?
Yeah.
And Dan Ige, the very first fight of the card, won in less than a minute.
Yeah.
So started off real hot, and there really were no lackluster fights for the Chicago crowd.
Yeah, it was a great card, just like you said. There was a lot of. We were talking about it afterwards that the main event or the main card was all went to decisions, but they didn't feel that way. But it was super entertaining. Curtis Blaydes, you mentioned, that's a guy who doesn't get enough praise.
Nope.
He's a guy who's evolving and he's learning and just watching him grow and add new tools. And I think it showed a lot about his mental capacity to weather that knee from Overeem and kind of weather that storm. But later in the third round, when he landed some big shots and kind of had Overeem on the ropes, he knew to go to what he was best at, get him to the ground, and then go with the ground and pound, and that led to the finish. So it was an exciting card, definitely, top to bottom.
And before we jump to the main card, I'll close out the prelims with this. Last week in Utica, we had Gleison Tebow come up short. We had Jake Ellenberger come up short. And then today, we had Overeem, Rashad, Clay Guida. It's really a changing of the guard. This is what we should expect in the UFC going forward, considering it seems like the same names are always at the top.
It's kind of weird, the UFC. It's a new sport, but we're going on 30 years, so it's not a new sport anymore. And I think the changing of the guard is kind of something that maybe a lot of fans today haven't had to go through. They haven't had to see the Chuck Liddells and the Tito Ortizes ride off into the sunset. You had Matt Hughes and BJ Penn here tonight. That represents an era that's kind of bygone. But Rashad Evans, he's been in the sport for a long time. Andre Arlovsky is a guy who's been in the sport for time. Yeah, but he's still on top of the game. Getting he arguably won that fight. He lost, right?
Yeah.
I remember. Yeah, he could have. Yeah, he could have won that fight. It was a close fight, but he's still making an impact in the division. So it's interesting. But I think new blood kind of brings about innovation and some changes, and it brings in a new energy and an excitement and new wrinkles, and I think that's going to carry the sport even further.
And we'll jump to the main card now. Started off with CM Punk. Outside of the top two fights, and even with those, it was really the CM Punk show all week. A lot of casual fans tuned in specifically for that. A lot of wrestling fans that might not watch UFC events or MMA in general, definitely, at least, maybe not tuned in, but they wanted to know whether he won or lost. What did you make of his performance? What did you make of his opponent Mike Jackson's performance? There was a lot made that it shouldn't be on the pay-per-view. Do you think at the end, Dana White said he wished it was on Fight Pass? Do you agree?
Hindsight's 20/20, right?
Sure.
So I think you can look back at the fight and say, yeah, it should have been on Fight Pass. But I think going into it, it was on pay-per-view for a reason. I think it's because it draws eyes and it draws attention. There's national media outlets here paying attention because of CM Punk. There's local media outlets here paying attention because of CM Punk, and the crowd was audibly behind CM Punk from the get-go. He's still a big name, and there was a little bit of mystique. He'd been off for 2 years. How much could he grow and evolve over those 2 years? So I think it was worth giving him a shot. But I think at the end of the day, it's a guy who started training in MMA in his 30s and, has one fight. I think that's kind of what we saw, and to expect otherwise was maybe a little bit foolish on our parts. But, Mike Jackson and his performance, he won
Not in Dana's eyes.
Yeah, not in Dana's eyes, but like, what was he supposed to do? He could have, I guess, gone for the finish a little bit, but you fight to win, and he won. So.
And we'll touch briefly upon this before we get to the main events. What did you make of Holly Holm's performance against Megan Anderson? Considering even Holly said she's never really fought someone taller than her. Maybe once in boxing, but like Holly said, it was different. Megan towered over Holly. We've never seen Holly undersized for an opponent, and she dominated that fight.
Yeah, Holm is probably more often used to being the taller opponent when she's fighting. She's a pretty tall woman, and I think it was an incredibly dominant performance. I mean, we've seen an evolution of Holm from the Germaine Durandamy fight, which was kind of maybe not her best performance, but not necessarily a bad performance. And then she goes 5 rounds with Chris Cyborg, something that nobody's ever done. And then she has this dominant win over somebody who's a 145-pound champion out of Invicta. And I think it says a lot to how she's evolved in this late stage of her career. She said she's going to be 37 soon. And I think it says a lot about how talented of a fighter she is and how she can be taken seriously at the 145-pound division. I mean, Megan Anderson, a lot of people thought she was going to come right in and fight Cyborg for the title, and then Holly Holm just kind of squashed that, and now she's got 2 division champions kind of waiting to see what happens with her, and she's kind of in the driver's seat.
What did you make of Colby Covington's performance? He edged RDA. I had it 48-47. I think that the majority agreed that was the scorecard. Were you surprised at his performance? Both men. Like, a lot of people thought RDA's jiu-jitsu was going to be enough to negate Colby's wrestling because that's his background. Were you surprised in RDA being able to keep the fight standing but couldn't get away? And were you more impressed with Colby Covington striking, which looked very crisp against someone training with Jason Perillo and is training with Rafael Cordero in the past?
Yeah, I think you can't say you weren't impressed with Colby Covington. Clean striking, and I don't know that he necessarily tried to do a whole lot of wrestling. It seemed like he wanted to kind of keep it on his feet and kind of went to wrestling and takedowns when he needed to. But I think you have to be impressed with his striking. Like you said, RDA trains with Jason Perillo, a prolific striking coach, and he's worked on that a lot. And I think that's kind of been a big evolution in his game and kind of what's allowed him to be successful and for Covington to kind of beat him on the feet. And this is a guy who's known for wrestling. He came into American Top Team as a collegiate wrestler, and he's kind of had to develop that skill. So it's not his strong suit, but for that to be his strong suit and to carry him to an interim title is kind of a big deal.
In the main event, Robert Whittaker narrowly edged Yoel Romero. Yoel Romero said he won. There were a lot of cheers for Yoel Romero. It seemed pretty 50-50 in the back. Who did you score it for?
I think I scored it for Whittaker. I think he won the first, second, and I think the 4th round was really close, and I think Romero won the 10. The 10 and the 5th. There's a little bit of debate as did Romero get a 10-8 round in the 5th round? I think that's kind of a discussion. I think I'm a little slow to hand out a 10-8 round, so I didn't personally do that, but I think you could see that, and that would have made it, a 47-47 draw?
That's what I had it scored.
Yeah, and I think that would have been a reasonable score. And to be perfectly honest, I think I would have been happy with that score. I know fans wouldn't, because fans want a winner and they want a loser, and they got to live in this black and white world. But I think a 47-47 score would have been a good score. But I think Whittaker, he clearly won the first 2 rounds. I think he won the 4th. So you got to remember to look at the rounds individually and not the whole product of the fight. It's easy to give Romero, in hindsight, the last 3 rounds when you look at how dominant he was in the 3rd round and the 5th round. But you have to remember you have to score each round in kind of isolation.
And Dana White revealed Robert Whittaker broke his hand pretty bad, and he's probably one of the most unlucky champions we've had in a long time. Like, hurt his knee almost a year ago when he fought Yoel the first time. Was supposed to come back in that big Perth card, defend his home country against Luke Rockhold, get such severe staph that he has to get hospitalized. Now he has a broken hand. What does this mean for the middleweight division? We had Kelvin back here. Chris Weidman was in attendance. Chris Weidman's hurt. Dana says Kelvin has personal issues. What do you make of this middleweight division, considering this fight was supposed to bring balance?
Yeah, and aside from all Whittaker's injury issues, you had Whittaker beating Romero for the interim title, and then you had Bisping defending the undisputed title for GSP, and then GSP winning and becoming champion, and then GSP vacating and Whittaker. So, the middleweight division. Not
even to mention, this wasn't technically a title fight because Romero missed weight.
That too. So I think I think a little time off from the middleweight division might be what it needs to kind of bring about stability, just to kind of let everything settle down. I think Weidman not being ready to come back kind of works in their favor. Whatever the personal issues that White wouldn't get into regarding Kelvin Gastelum, I think that kind of works into their favor. They can kind of pause and just let it kind of sort itself out and kind of go forward from there. If the injury is going to take longer than by the end of the year to heal up, then maybe we have to look towards an interim title. But I think you just let everybody kind of sit and wait and get healthy and then kind of go from there. You don't want to bring in another interim title and just make it a whole messy situation again.
And I'll close it from here from the United Center. Great night of fights. Mike Dyce came back for one night to join us on Facebook and YouTube. We had a lot of videos up on all of our social channels. A lot of weight cutting, a lot of talk about the White House. But until then, we'll be back International Fight Week. Dyce, are you going to be there?
Maybe.
Maybe Dyce will be there. See you next time.